The chains around my wrists were not made for a human body, and that was the first thing I noticed when I woke up. They were too wide, built for something with 6 limbs instead of 2, and they cut into my skin at strange angles. My head was pounding. My vision came back in pieces. First light, then shapes, then the shining black floor beneath my knees. I was kneeling. I did not remember kneeling. Someone had forced me down, and my legs had simply obeyed because the rest of me was still catching up to the fact that I was alive. The room was enormous, built in a shape that made no sense to my eyes at first. Curved walls rising up into a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. The air smelled sharp, like burnt metal, and something sweet underneath it, something almost like rotting fruit. Around me stood tall, narrow figures with segmented limbs and shining plates instead of skin, their eyes glowing faintly blue in the dim light. Soldiers. I recognized the posture even if I did not recognize the species. Every army in the galaxy stands the same way when it is guarding something it fears. At the far end of the chamber, on a throne that looked like it had grown out of the floor rather than been built, sat the one they called the Queen. I had heard stories about her from the survivors of other colonies, whispered in mess halls and supply lines, the kind of stories that get bigger every time someone repeats them. They said she never lost a war. They said her hive had wiped out entire fleets without losing a single ship. They said no human who stood before her had ever walked out again. I was about to find out if any of that was true. She was larger than the soldiers around her, easily 3 times my height, with a body that shimmered between deep purple and black, depending on how the light hit her. Her face, if you could call it that, held 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, and when they all turned toward me at once, I felt my stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with fear of pain and everything to do with the simple, animal knowledge that something ancient and powerful was looking directly at me. "Human," she said. Her voice came out low and layered, like 3 voices speaking at once, slightly out of sync. "You are the one who destroyed the collector ship." It was not a question, so I did not treat it like one. I kept my mouth shut and my eyes forward, the way I had been trained to do in situations exactly like this one, though nobody had ever trained me for a situation exactly like this one. She rose from her throne, and the soldiers around me shifted back, giving her room. Each step she took sounded like stone grinding against stone, deliberate, unhurried, the walk of someone who had never once needed to rush anywhere because everyone else always got out of her way first. "Do you know what we do with pilots who destroy our ships?" she asked, stopping only a few feet from me now, close enough that I could feel heat radiating off her body. "I imagine you're about to tell me," I said. One of the soldiers hissed at my tone, but the Queen raised a claw, and the sound died instantly. She tilted her head, studying me the way you might study an insect that had wandered somewhere it should not have been able to reach. "You are not afraid," she said. "I didn't say that. Your body says it for you," she replied. "Your heart rate is elevated. Your skin has changed color at the surface, and yet you speak as though this were an inconvenience rather than the end of your existence." I did not have a good answer for that, so I gave her the only one I had. "Where I come from, we don't get the luxury of falling apart just because something's trying to kill us." Something shifted behind her eyes. Not quite surprise, not quite interest, something else, something I would not understand until much later. She reached out one long clawed hand and gripped my jaw, tilting my face up toward the light, turning it left and right as though inspecting a piece of equipment for damage. I let her. There did not seem to be much choice in the matter, and struggling against a creature 3 times my size and clearly built for combat seemed like a poor use of the little energy I had left. That was when her claw brushed against the side of my neck, where the collar of my flight suit had torn away during the crash. I felt her pause. I knew what she had found before she said anything. The wound had been bothering me since I woke up, a long, ugly gash that ran from just below my ear down toward my collarbone. The kind of injury that happens when metal meets flesh at high speed, and neither one wins cleanly. It had stopped bleeding hours ago, the edges already crusted and dark, but it was still raw enough to sting whenever I moved my head too quickly. The Queen's fingers went still against my skin. "This," she said slowly, "should not be possible." I did not understand what she meant, not yet. I assumed she was talking about the size of the wound, or the fact that I had survived the crash that caused it, or maybe even the fact that I was still conscious enough to talk back to her. I had no idea that the thing troubling her was something far stranger than survival. She crouched down in front of me, bringing all four of her eyes level with my face, staring at the wound the way a scientist stares at results that contradict everything they thought they understood about the universe. "You were injured before capture," she said. It was not a question this time either, but there was something different in her tone now, something almost unsteady. "Little over 6 hours ago," I said, "give or take. And you are still speaking to me. Would you rather I didn't?" Her claw tightened slightly against my jaw, not enough to hurt, but enough that I understood the gesture was involuntary, a reaction she had not fully controlled. Around us, the soldiers had gone completely silent, watching their queen with an intensity that told me this was not normal behavior for her, whatever was happening right now. "In my hive," she said, "when one of our own suffers a wound of this depth, they are removed from the line within minutes. Their body begins to fail, their thoughts scatter, they cannot stand, cannot speak, cannot fight. It is a mercy, ending them quickly, because there is no version of survival that follows an injury like this one." I looked at her, and for the first time since waking up in that chamber, I felt something other than fear. I felt confusion, plain and simple, because I could not understand why a scratch on my neck was causing an ancient, all-powerful alien queen to tremble in front of an entire room of her own soldiers. "It's just a cut," I said. "It is not just a cut," she snapped, and for the first time her three overlapping voices came out sharp and uneven, like something inside her had cracked slightly. "It is a wound that should have already taken you, and yet here you sit, upright, coherent, speaking to me as though nothing at all is wrong with you." She stood up fast, taking several steps back, and the soldiers around the chamber shifted uneasily, clearly unused to seeing their queen retreat from anything, let alone a single unarmed prisoner kneeling in chains. "Bring the physician," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber, though I never saw her look away from me. "Now." A soldier scrambled out of a side door, so fast it nearly tripped over its own legs. I stayed where I was, kneeling on that cold black floor, my wrists aching under the two wide chains, and I watched the most powerful being I had ever encountered take another step back from me, her eyes locked onto a wound that, to me, barely registered as anything more than an annoyance. Something told me this was the beginning of a very different conversation than the one I had been expecting. The physician arrived moments later, a smaller version of the same species, moving with quick, nervous steps, clearly summoned in a hurry. It carried some kind of scanning device, a curved instrument that hummed faintly as it approached me, and the queen gestured toward my neck without a word. The physician leaned in, running the scanner over the wound slowly, once, then again, then a third time, as though it did not trust its own readings. When it finally straightened up, it looked toward the queen, and even through an alien face I did not know how to read, I could see something close to disbelief. "The readings are consistent," the physician said. "The wound is exactly as severe as it appears. There is no error in the instrument." "Then explain to me," the queen said, "why he is not dead." The physician had no answer. Neither did I, not really, though I was beginning to understand that whatever was happening in this room went far beyond a simple cut on my neck. It went to the very core of what these creatures believed about strength, about survival, about what a body was supposed to be able to endure. And somewhere underneath the fear, and the confusion and the ache in my wrists, a small, quiet part of me started to realize that maybe, just maybe, I held more power in this chamber than the chains around my wrists suggested. The queen turned back toward me, her four eyes narrower now, sharper, studying me not as a prisoner anymore, but as a puzzle she desperately needed to solve. "Tell me," she said, her voice steadier now, but no less unsettled. "What manner of creature are you, that a wound like this does not end you where you sit?" I looked up at her, chains biting into my wrists, blood dried along my neck, and for the first time since I had woken up in that chamber, I allowed myself the smallest, faintest smile. "That," I said, "is a very long story." The physician did not leave, neither did the soldiers. The queen waved a claw, and the guards tightened their circle around me, though none of them moved to strike me or force me back to my knees. I had already fallen into a strange, unspoken truce with this room. I was still a prisoner, still in chains, but something about the wound on my neck had shifted the balance of power in ways none of us fully understood yet. The queen lowered herself onto a low stone seat that one of her attendants brought forward, bringing her eyes level with mine again. Up close, I could see fine cracks running along the plates of her face, old scars from battles long past, each one perfectly smooth and healed, none of them anywhere near as deep as the one on my neck. "Explain," she said, slowly. "I want to understand every part of it." I shifted my weight, trying to find a position that did not put more strain on my wrists, and began. "Where I'm from, injuries like this happen all the time," I said. "Not because we want them to, because the world we grew up on never gave us a choice. Our planet is full of things that want to kill us, weather that can freeze you in minutes or burn you in seconds, animals bigger and faster and stronger than we are, diseases too small to see that can bring down an entire city if we let them. We didn't get to evolve somewhere gentle." The queen's eyes flicked toward the physician, then back to me. "And your species survived this." "Barely, some might say. But yes, we survived it because our bodies learned to fight back the moment something goes wrong. The second I got this cut, something inside me was already working to stop the bleeding, to close the wound, to keep infection out. I didn't tell my body to do that. It just happens. It's been happening to every human for longer than any of us can remember." "All creatures possess some capacity for healing," the queen said, though there was less certainty in her voice now than before. "This is not unique." "Maybe not the healing itself," I said, "but I think what's throwing you off is something else. It's not that the wound is closing. It's that I'm still standing while it does." She said nothing, so I kept going, because for the first time since I had woken up in that chamber, I realized that talking might be the only weapon I had left, and I intended to use it. "There was a mission a few years back," I said. "Before the war reached your side of space, I was part of a ground team sent to clear out a research outpost that had gone dark. We didn't know why it went quiet, only that it had. When we got there, we found out the hard way. Something had gotten into the ventilation system. Some kind of creature none of us had ever seen before, fast, low to the ground, built for killing in tight spaces. The soldiers around me had gone very still, listening despite themselves. It got two of my team before we even understood what we were fighting," I continued. "By the time we killed it, I had a gash across my leg deep enough that I could see bone. My commanding officer wanted to call for immediate evacuation. I told her no." "Why would you refuse aid for such an injury?" the queen asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice now, not just suspicion. "Because there were still people trapped further inside that station," I said. "Civilians. Scientists who hadn't made it out before the creature found them. If we pulled back to wait for evacuation, they wouldn't have survived long enough for us to come back. So I wrapped the leg as tight as I could, took something for the pain, and kept moving. With bone visible beneath torn flesh." "With bone visible beneath torn flesh," I confirmed. "It wasn't easy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it didn't hurt, because it hurt more than almost anything I've ever felt. But hurting and stopping are two different things. My body kept working, my mind kept working, and in the end, we got every one of those scientists out alive." The queen was quiet for a long moment, her 4 eyes moving slowly over the wound on my neck, as though seeing it in an entirely new light. "You are describing a species that continues to function while its body is failing," she said finally. "I'm describing a species that doesn't consider a wound a reason to stop," I said. "There's a difference. My body isn't failing right now. It's fighting. Every second since this cut happened, something inside me has been working to close it, to protect me, to keep me upright and thinking clearly enough to have this conversation with you. That's not failure. That's the opposite of failure. The physician stepped forward hesitantly, addressing the queen rather than me. In our hive, an injury of this severity halts higher function almost immediately. The mind becomes consumed with managing the damage. Speech, reasoning, coordinated movement, all of it fails within moments. And yet he sits here, the queen said, reasoning with more clarity than half the warriors in my own court. I watched something pass through her expression that I still could not fully translate. Not fear exactly, but something close to it, layered with a kind of fascination I had not expected from a creature of her power. There is more, I said, deciding that if I had her attention, I might as well use it fully. It isn't only injury we push through, it's loss too. Grief, exhaustion, hunger, cold. Every terrible thing a body and mind can experience, we have found ways to keep functioning through all of it, because stopping was never something our species could afford to do. Explain further, she said, and for the first time her voice held something close to a command wrapped inside a request, as though she genuinely needed to know rather than simply wanted to test me. There was a woman I served with, I said, Grace Lawson. She was our field medic. During one operation she took a wound to her side that should have ended her right there on the field. Instead, she kept working on the rest of us, stitching wounds with hands that were shaking from her own blood loss, refusing to stop until every one of us had been treated first. By the time she finally let someone look at her own injury, she had lost enough blood that most people would have already lost consciousness. And she survived. She survived, I said, because somewhere along the way, our species learned that giving up costs more lives than pushing forward ever could. We don't do this because we enjoy suffering. We do it because the alternative is worse. End quote. The queen rose from her seat again, pacing now, something she clearly did not do often, given how stiffly her guards reacted to the movement. This changes everything, she murmured, more to herself than to me, though her three-layered voices carried easily across the silent chamber. Every battle report I have received described human forces as weakened once injured, slower, less coordinated. I assumed this meant they were finished, that our warriors need only press the advantage to end the engagement. A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I began to understand what she was actually saying. You've been finishing off wounded soldiers, I said quietly, thinking they were already beaten. She stopped pacing and looked at me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. If what you are telling me is true, she said finally, then every wounded human my warriors encountered in battle was not a defeated enemy retreating from the field. They were a threat that had simply not yet finished fighting. I thought about every story I had heard from other survivors, every account of soldiers who had gone down injured only to take out 2 or 3 more attackers before finally falling, every retreat that had cost the enemy far more than it should have. I thought about how many of those stories had probably been dismissed by this queen's forces as strange anomalies, rather than the truth of what humans actually were. You have no idea how deep that mistake runs, I said. The queen's eyes narrowed, and this time when she looked at me, there was no mistaking the expression behind them. It was not curiosity anymore. It was something closer to dread, the kind that comes when a powerful creature realizes it may have badly misjudged an enemy it thought it fully understood. Then you will tell me, she said, every detail. I need to understand exactly what my hive has been fighting against, before this misunderstanding costs us far more than it already has. The physician returned a short while later, with 2 others of its kind, both carrying instruments I did not recognize, thin devices that glowed faintly at the tips. The queen ordered my chains loosened enough to allow the scientist to examine me more closely, though guards remained close on every side, watching my every movement with an intensity that told me the shift in respect had not erased their caution. One of the scientists ran a device along my arm, pausing at a set of faded scars near my elbow, old enough that they had turned pale and smooth years ago. More injuries, it said, glancing toward the Queen. Healed completely, long before the neck wound occurred. Ask him, the Queen said, though she was looking directly at me rather than the scientist. That one's from a fall, I said, holding up my arm so they could see it clearly. I was young, maybe 11 years old, climbing somewhere I shouldn't have been. Broke the bone in 2 places. It hurt for weeks, but it healed. My body simply fused the pieces back together and kept going. At such a young age, the scientist murmured, running its device over the scar again, as though expecting different results the second time. Children get hurt constantly where I'm from, I said. It's part of growing up. You fall, you scrape yourself, sometimes you break something, and every single time, your body starts repairing itself immediately, without anyone telling it to. By the time most of us reach adulthood, we've already survived dozens of injuries that would have ended a lot of other creatures. The Queen leaned forward slightly. Your species allows its young to face such danger. We don't allow it so much as we can't stop it entirely, I said. The universe doesn't ask permission before it throws something dangerous at a child. All we can do is raise them strong enough to survive what they can't avoid. I could see the concept unsettling her, the idea that an entire species had built its culture around surviving constant, unavoidable injury rather than eliminating the possibility of harm altogether. In her hive, I was beginning to understand danger was something managed, controlled, filtered out before it ever reached anyone valuable enough to matter. The idea that an entire civilization simply absorbed injury as a normal part of existence and kept moving forward anyway seemed almost incomprehensible to her. There is a soldier among my ranks, she said slowly, who lost 2 limbs during a skirmish decades ago. He was removed from active duty immediately. His usefulness to the hive ended the moment his body was no longer whole. What happened to him? I asked. He serves in a support role now, quiet duties, nothing that requires him to face danger again. We have people like that too, I said. Soldiers who lose limbs, who suffer injuries that change what they're capable of doing physically. But losing a piece of yourself doesn't mean you stop being useful, and it definitely doesn't mean you stop being dangerous. I've known soldiers who lost a leg in combat and came back to serve just as effectively as before, sometimes even more effectively, because they refused to let the injury define what they were still capable of. How is this possible? The Queen said, and for the first time her voice held something that sounded almost like exhaustion, the fatigue of a mind trying to absorb too many contradictions at once. A body cannot function the same after such loss. No, it can't function the same, I agreed. But the same isn't the only way to be effective. We adapt. We find new ways to move, new ways to fight, new ways to live. The body might change, but the will behind it doesn't have to. One of the scientists set down its instrument and looked toward the Queen. The reports from the front lines make more sense now, it said quietly. The engagements where our forces suffered unexpected losses after believing the enemy neutralized, the retreats that turned into ambushes. We attributed these outcomes to tactical deception. It was never deception, I said. It was just humans doing what humans do, getting hurt and refusing to stop until the mission was finished. The Queen's eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the faces of her own soldiers, each one now standing a little straighter, a little more uneasy than before. I understood what she was seeing. An entire chamber full of warriors who had grown up believing that injury meant the end of usefulness, now forced to confront the idea that their enemy considered injury nothing more than an inconvenience to work around. "Tell me something," the Queen said, turning her attention fully back to me. "If a wound like the one on your neck does not stop you, what does? What is required to end a human's ability to fight?" It was a fair question, and a dangerous one, because I understood exactly what she was really asking. She wanted to know how to win. She wanted to know what weakness, if any, actually existed beneath all of this. "Plenty of things can end us," I said honestly, because there was no point pretending otherwise. We're not invincible. Enough damage, enough blood loss, enough time without help, and eventually, Any human will go down just like anything else. What's different is where that line sits. You're used to fighting creatures who stop the moment they're wounded. We don't stop until the body genuinely can't continue anymore, and by the time that happens, we've usually already done a great deal of damage to whatever was trying to stop us. The Queen absorbed this in silence, and I watched something shift behind her eyes, a recalculation taking place, an entire strategy built on decades of assumptions being quietly, carefully dismantled. Every battle we believed won, she said slowly, may have cost us more than any report ever indicated. Probably, I said, not because your soldiers are weak. From everything I've seen, you're strong, disciplined, well-organized. But strength built around avoiding injury entirely creates a blind spot the moment you face someone who considers injury just another obstacle to push through. She turned away from me for a moment, addressing the physician and the scientist directly. Gather every record we have of engagements against human forces, every casualty report, every account of unexpected losses following what should have been a secured victory. I want them reviewed immediately, with this new understanding applied to each one. The scientists moved quickly to obey, and I watched the chamber shift around me, soldiers exchanging uneasy glances, the entire mood of the room transforming from confident superiority into something far more uncertain. I remained where I was, chains loosened, but still present, watching an alien empire quietly begin to realize that everything they thought they understood about their enemy had been wrong from the very beginning. The Queen turned back to me one final time before dismissing the scientists to their work. You said strength, built around avoiding injury, creates a blind spot, she said. Tell me plainly, do you believe my hive can defeat your species in open war? I thought about Grace Lawson stitching wounds with shaking hands. I thought about the research outpost, my leg torn open to the bone, walking anyway because people needed saving. I thought about every human I had ever served beside who had been hurt and kept moving regardless. I think, I said slowly, you're about to find out exactly how expensive that question really is. The scientists left the chamber quickly, carrying their instruments and their new instructions, and for a while the Queen said nothing at all. She simply stood there, watching me with those 4 unblinking eyes, and I could almost see the weight of what she had just learned settling onto her shoulders. One of the guards, however, was not ready to accept any of it. He was younger than the others, or at least his plating looked less worn, and he had been standing closest to me since the beginning, close enough that I had noticed his claws tightening every time I spoke without permission. His name, I would later learn, was Threk, one of the Queen's personal guard, chosen for loyalty rather than patience. My Queen, he said, stepping forward before she could stop him, this creature speaks with confidence it has not earned. It sits in chains before your throne and dares to suggest our warriors are inferior. Allow me to demonstrate the truth of his weakness. The Queen's eyes narrowed, a warning I recognized even across species, but Threk either did not see it or chose to ignore it. He moved toward me fast, faster than I expected from something his size, and grabbed the front of my flight suit, hauling me up from my knees with one clawed hand. You will show proper respect, he hissed, his face inches from mine, or I will show you exactly what pain truly feels like for a creature such as yourself. I did not fight him, not yet. I let him pull me up, let him think for just a moment that he had the advantage, because there was something I needed him to understand before this went any further. You should let go of me, I said quietly. And why would I do that? Because you're about to hurt yourself. He laughed, a harsh, grinding sound, and tightened his grip on my suit, his claws digging in hard enough that I felt them pierce fabric and skin beneath it. Pain flared bright and sharp along my chest, but I kept my eyes locked on his, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. That was when I moved. It was not complicated, not some impossible feat of strength. I simply twisted my body the way I had been trained to do years ago, redirecting his own momentum against the joint of his arm, and used the leverage to break his grip entirely. He stumbled forward, off balance for just a moment, and in that moment, I drove my elbow back into the softer plating just beneath his jaw. He screamed. It was a sound I had not expected, high and cracking, nothing like the low grinding growl he had used moments before. He staggered back, one claw pressed against his jaw where dark fluid was now seeping between his fingers, and the entire chamber went utterly silent. I stood there, chains still loose around my wrists, blood from his claws soaking into my flight suit where he had grabbed me, and I did not move again. I did not need to. The silence in the room was doing all the talking for me. The Queen rose from her seat, and for a moment I genuinely did not know whether she was about to have me executed on the spot for striking one of her guards. Instead, she walked slowly toward Threk, who had dropped to one knee, still clutching his jaw, his breathing ragged and uneven. "Stand," she said. He tried. His legs shook, and he barely managed it, one hand still pressed against the wound, dark fluid dripping steadily onto the black floor beneath him. "You are injured," the Queen said, and there was something cold in her voice now, something I had not heard from her before. "It is nothing, my Queen," Threk said, though his voice wavered as he said it. "A minor strike. I will recover." "You can barely stand," she said. "Your speech is already slowing. Your balance has failed twice since you rose." I watched Threk's expression change, the realization slowly dawning on him just as it had dawned on his Queen only minutes earlier. He had been struck once, a single blow to a vulnerable point, and already his body was beginning to shut down the way every soldier in this hive had been trained to expect. Meanwhile, I stood only a few feet away with a wound across my neck that should have ended me hours ago, still on my feet, still speaking clearly, still thinking without difficulty. "He struck me only once," Threk said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "And you nearly attacked a creature that has survived far worse without slowing," the Queen said. "Do you understand now what I have been trying to explain to this entire chamber?" Threk did not answer. He did not need to. The proof was standing directly in front of him, dripping fluid onto the floor, while a chained human prisoner remained upright, uninjured beyond a few claw marks, watching the exchange with an expression that I imagine looked far calmer than anything these creatures were used to seeing from someone in my position. "Take him to the physician," the Queen said, and two guards moved quickly to support Threk, who was now struggling visibly to keep his balance, one hand still clutching his jaw as they guided him toward the door he had ordered summoned only a short while earlier. Once he was gone, the Queen turned back to me, and something in her posture had changed entirely. The suspicion was still there, the caution, but underneath it now sat something far heavier, something closer to genuine concern. "You could have avoided striking him," she said. "You allowed him to grab you first." "I wanted him to understand," I said. Words weren't going to convince him. He needed to feel it. "And now, an entire chamber of my warriors has witnessed a chained, wounded prisoner disable one of my personal guard with a single strike, while that same prisoner's own injury remains untreated and yet causes him no visible difficulty." "That's about the size of it," I said. She was quiet for a long moment, and I watched her gaze drift across the room, taking in the faces of every soldier present, each one now watching me with an expression I had not seen from them before. It was not hatred, and it was not simple caution either. It was something closer to genuine fear, the kind that settles into a creature's chest when it realizes the world is far more dangerous than it had been led to believe. "I need you to understand something," the Queen said finally. "My hive has fought many wars. We have conquered species far larger than ourselves, far more numerous, far more heavily armed. We have done this because our warriors understand exactly where their limits lie, and they respect those limits absolutely. A wounded warrior withdraws. An injured warrior surrenders their position to one who remains whole. This has always been our strength." "It's been your strength against enemies who think the same way you do," I said, "but we don't operate on those rules. Every human soldier grows up understanding that injury doesn't automatically mean defeat. Sometimes it means the fight has only just begun." "Then explain to me," she said, How many of my forces have fallen to enemies they believed were already finished? I thought about it honestly before answering, because I understood how much weight this question actually carried. Probably more than you'd want to know, I said. Every time one of your soldiers pressed forward against a wounded human, thinking the fight was over, they were walking into someone who still had every intention of finishing what they started. Adrenaline alone can carry a person through injuries that should have stopped them completely. Add in training, determination, and the simple fact that giving up was never considered an option, and you start to understand why those engagements probably didn't go the way your reports suggested they should have. The Queen lowered herself back onto her seat slowly, and for the first time since I had woken up in that chamber, she looked less like an ancient, unstoppable ruler, and more like someone quietly absorbing the fact that a war she believed was mostly won might actually still be very much undecided. "There is a term your species uses," she said eventually. "I have heard it in intercepted communications, but never understood its full weight until this moment." "What term?" "Do not tell them it's just a scratch," she said slowly, repeating words that must have been picked up somewhere along the way. I assumed this was simple denial, a refusal to acknowledge injury out of pride. "It's not denial," I said. "It's just true, most of the time. A scratch is a scratch. It doesn't mean the fight is over. It doesn't mean the mission stops. It means you keep going, and you deal with it properly once the job is finished. And if the job is never finished," she said, "because the injury eventually proves fatal after all." "Then at least it happened while still trying," I said, instead of giving up the moment things got difficult. She studied me for a long time after that, and I could see something forming behind those 4 eyes, some kind of decision taking shape that I did not yet fully understand. "I have ruled this hive for longer than your species has understood spaceflight," she said finally. "I have never once questioned the foundation upon which our strength was built. Today, in the span of less than an hour, a single wounded prisoner has forced me to question everything." "That wasn't my intention," I said, though it was only half true. "I was just answering your questions honestly." "Honesty," she said, "has proven far more dangerous than any weapon your species has used against us so far." She rose from her seat once more, and this time when she looked at me, there was no mistaking the decision that had finally settled behind her eyes. "Release his chains completely," she said to the remaining guards, "and summon my war council, immediately. Everything we believed about this conflict must be reconsidered before another soldier is lost to a misunderstanding that should never have existed in the first place." The chains fell away from my wrists, and for the first time since waking up in that chamber, I stood as a free man rather than a prisoner. My skin was raw where the metal had rubbed against it, and the wound on my neck still ached with every movement. But none of that mattered nearly as much as the fact that an alien empire's entire war council was about to be summoned because of a conversation that had started with a simple scratch. The chamber filled quickly. Advisors, commanders, and high-ranking members of the hive arrived one after another, each of them pausing at the sight of me standing unchained near the Queen's throne, blood still dried along my neck and chest. Whispers passed between them, quick and quiet, and I caught enough fragments to understand that word of what had happened with Threk had already spread faster than I expected. The Queen waited until the chamber was full before speaking, her voice carrying easily across the gathered crowd. "Every commander present has led forces against human colonies," she said. "Every one of you has submitted reports describing engagements where enemy forces were neutralized, only for losses to continue mounting afterward in ways that defied explanation. I want each of you to reconsider those reports now, with new information that changes everything we believed about the enemy we face." She explained what I had told her, laying it out plainly for the assembled council: the biology of human resilience, the willingness to continue fighting through injury, the entire cultural foundation built around refusing to let pain dictate the outcome of a battle. I watched the reactions ripple through the crowd, disbelief giving way slowly to uneasy recognition as commanders began connecting the explanation to battles they had personally overseen. One of the older commanders, his plating dulled with age and old scars, stepped forward hesitantly. "My queen," he said, "if this is accurate, then the engagement at the outer colony 3 seasons ago requires reconsideration. We reported a clean victory, minimal resistance following initial contact, yet we lost nearly a third of the assault force during what should have been a simple securing operation." "Explain the details," the queen said. "The human defenders were reported as neutralized within the first exchange," the commander continued. "Wounded, unable to continue resistance, our forces advanced to secure the position. That is when the unexpected losses occurred. I remembered that battle. Not personally, but from the reports that had circulated afterward, stories told with a kind of grim pride among soldiers who had survived it. A small defense force, badly outnumbered, had held a position against overwhelming odds far longer than anyone expected, inflicting losses that had seemed almost impossible given the size of the attacking force. Your forces walked forward believing the fight was already over," I said. "Every human still capable of holding a weapon kept fighting until they physically couldn't anymore. That's not a strange anomaly. That's just what we do." The commander's expression, unreadable as it was to me, still managed to convey something close to horror as the full weight of that realization settled in. Another commander spoke up, younger, sharper in tone. "If what this human says is accurate, then our entire strategic doctrine against their species has been fundamentally flawed from the very beginning of this conflict." "It has," the queen said simply, "and it is a flaw we can no longer afford to carry forward." The council fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence, the kind that settles over a room full of powerful beings suddenly confronted with the fact that their power has limits they never accounted for. I stood there quietly, letting them work through it, because there was nothing more I could add that would make the truth any easier to accept. Finally, the queen turned to me, and the entire chamber's attention shifted along with her. "You have given my hive something valuable today," she said. "Understanding, however uncomfortable it may be, is worth more than any weapon we could deploy against an enemy we do not truly comprehend." "I didn't do it as a gift," I said honestly. "I did it because you asked, and because pretending otherwise wasn't going to help either of us." "Regardless of intention," she said, "the outcome remains the same. My hive now understands, more clearly than ever before, exactly what we have been fighting against. This changes the nature of this conflict entirely." I felt something tighten in my chest at that, a worry I had been holding back since the moment I started talking. "Does that mean you're planning to fight harder?" I asked. "Or does it mean you're finally considering that this war might not be worth finishing?" The queen studied me for a long moment before answering, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight I had not heard from her before, something that sounded almost like exhaustion layered beneath centuries of unquestioned authority. "My hive has never lost a war," she said. "Not once, in all the centuries I have ruled. Every enemy we have faced eventually understood their limits and yielded before losses became unacceptable. Your species has shown no sign of understanding limits the way every other enemy has." "That's because we don't have the kind of limits you're used to fighting against," I said. "Precisely," she said, "which means continuing this conflict as we have been fighting it would cost my hive far more than any previous war in our history, potentially more than we could survive intact. A ruler who continues down a path toward that outcome, knowing what I now know, is not strong. She is simply unwilling to accept a truth that has already been made clear." The chamber remained silent, every commander and advisor watching their queen closely as she reached whatever conclusion she was working toward. I found myself holding my breath, not out of fear exactly, but because I understood that whatever she said next would carry consequences far beyond this single chamber, consequences that would ripple out to every human colony still fighting for survival against this hive. "I will not order a full retreat," she said finally, "because that would leave my forces vulnerable during withdrawal, and I will not sacrifice more lives correcting a mistake that has already cost us enough. But I will order an immediate halt to all offensive operations against human territory, effective from this moment forward, until my war council has fully reassessed our understanding of this conflict." A murmur passed through the gathered commanders, some clearly uneasy with the decision, others visibly relieved. I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was wound so tight, a tension that had been building since the moment I first woke up in that chamber, uncertain whether I would survive the hour, let alone walk out of it having changed anything meaningful. "And what happens to me?" I asked, because it seemed important to know exactly where I stood now that the larger conversation had reached its conclusion. The Queen turned to look at me directly, her 4 eyes settling into an expression I had come to recognize over the course of our conversation, something between respect and unease, the kind of look a powerful creature gives something it has learned to take seriously. "You will be returned to your people," she said, "unharmed beyond the injuries you already carried into this chamber. I do not believe holding you serves any purpose now that the truth has already been spoken. If anything, returning you intact sends a clearer message than anything else I could do." "What message is that?" I asked. "That my hive now understands exactly what we are dealing with," she said, "and that understanding alone has changed the course of this war more than any battle we have fought against your species so far." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me, the strange, unlikely reality that a single wound on my neck had somehow shifted the direction of an entire interstellar conflict. Preparations began quickly after that. A transport was arranged, guided by coordinates that would return me to the edge of human-controlled space, close enough that a rescue signal would reach friendly forces within hours. Before I was led toward the departure bay, the Queen approached me one final time, alone, without the crowd of commanders and advisors surrounding her. "I want you to understand something before you leave," she said. "This war is not finished. My hive will not simply abandon everything we have built toward conquering your territory, not after so much has already been invested. But we will not continue fighting blindly, believing wounded enemies to be finished enemies. That mistake alone has likely cost thousands of lives on both sides." "I understand," I said. "Do you?" she asked. "Because I do not believe you fully grasp what you have done here today. You have taught an empire that has never questioned its own strength. That strength, built on avoiding injury entirely, is no strength at all when facing an enemy that considers injury simply another obstacle. That lesson will not be forgotten, and it will not be ignored." Hind. I looked at her for a long moment, thinking about everything that had happened since I first woke up in that chamber, chained and expecting the worst, and I found myself genuinely uncertain what to say in response. "For what it's worth," I said finally, "I hope this means fewer people die from here on out, on both sides." Something passed behind her eyes that I still could not fully name, though it looked, for just a moment, almost like something close to respect. "That," she said, "is a hope I did not expect from a captured enemy soldier." "Maybe that's the part you still don't fully understand about us," I said. "We don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because we have to. Given the choice, most of us would rather not lose anyone at all, on either side." She did not respond to that, not directly, though she watched me carefully as the guards finally led me toward the transport that would carry me home. I climbed aboard slowly, my body finally beginning to feel the full weight of exhaustion now that the danger had passed, the adrenaline that had carried me through the entire encounter finally starting to fade. As the transport doors closed and the engines began to hum beneath me, I caught one last glimpse of the Queen standing at the edge of the departure bay, watching the ship rise into the dark sky above her hive's fortress. Her 4 eyes remained fixed on the transport until it was completely out of sight, and I wondered, as the stars blurred past the viewport and the adrenaline finally gave way to genuine relief, exactly how many more conversations like ours would need to happen before this war finally reached its true end. The wound on my neck ached the entire journey home, a dull, constant reminder of everything that had happened, everything that had changed because a scratch that should have meant nothing to me had meant absolutely everything to an empire that had built its entire existence around never allowing itself to bleed. Somewhere behind me, in a chamber built from black stone and ancient authority, An alien queen who had never once questioned her own strength was now forced to reconsider everything she believed about the enemy she faced, all because a single human soldier had refused to stop functioning simply because his body had been wounded. And somewhere deep inside that hive, I suspected, word was already spreading among every soldier who had witnessed what happened in that chamber, a quiet, unsettling realization taking root across an entire species built on strength through avoiding pain. They had finally learned what it truly meant to wound a human, and discover, to their horror, that we simply do not stop.